program. Michael can be found on Twitter at Michael E. O'Neill and on the interwebs at counterpower.org. Michael, welcome to the show.
Ali Presente. I was listening to you guys, wrapping up that segment, and absolutely, he lived an extraordinary life of extraordinary struggle and courage in the face of war and racial discrimination, and there's a lot to remember today.
Yeah, we were discussing just pre-productions. Like, we could do a 6-hour show and just strictly on Muhammad Ali, but we'll move on to a smaller world, politics. First question for you is going to be kind of a softball. Now, in basic terms, that even a 5-year-old can understand, what is the Green Party's platform, and how is it different from the Democrats' agenda?
The Green Party stands for people, planet, and peace over profit. And we have 4 pillars of our movement going back, almost 40 or 50 years now since the first Green Party started in Europe. And we call for grassroots democracy, which means real participation in our political system at every level, not just voting, every year, every couple of years, or every 4 years. We call for nonviolence, which is more than just the absence of obvious conflict, but it means taking on the systems of oppression that silence people and restrict their participation in public life and in political processes. It means It means ending the violence that's inflicted by poverty on billions of people every day. We call for social justice, which means looking at all the ways of gender, race, sexual orientation, sexual expression, religion, all the different ways that people are intersectionally oppressed in our society and around the world. And we call for ecological wisdom, and that's probably what we're most known for as the Green Party, is that we call for a radical reorientation of our society so that we are living in harmony with the planet, that we are not constantly trying to exploit nature as just a resource to be seized, but that we are accepting the limits of our biosphere, and that we are trying to work in harmony with that. And we're different from the Democratic Party structurally because we do not take any money from corporate lobbyists. We do not take any money from super PACs. That is built into the DNA of our organization. And in the Green Party of New York, we do not cross-endorse Democrats, unlike some other so-called progressive third parties in this state. So we are different both in our platform, but I think more importantly, we are structurally different because we have committed ourselves to financial independence from Wall Street and the corporations and a capitalist system that has completely run amok. And that financial independence is what safeguards our political independence.
And again, I really want to thank you for taking the time out. I know you've got to be incredibly busy in this part of the campaign, so thank you again so much for joining us. So what drew you personally to the party, and what barriers have you encountered in your work for the Green Party?
I am a proud, unrepentant Ralph Nader voter from 2000. I was 20 years old in the year 2000, and Ralph Nader came and spoke to where I was going to college in Cleveland at the time. I had been aware of Ralph Nader's work for a while, and it was that whole moment of the social justice movement that had been building. We'd had the battle in Seattle at the World Trade Organization leading up to that. There was all of this consolidation of media that now seems very quaint, that we were worried about some of the mergers at the time of like AOL Time Warner and CBS Viacom, and now the corporate media and corporate internet institutions we have now completely dwarf those mergers. But so seeing that you had two parties which were both in service to a Wall Street agenda that was not in accordance with what our planet needed and what our people were demanding for. And the idea of creating something new and creating something that again, structurally was taking out independence from this corporate system that had captured so much of our political process. And that, since then, I did a lot of work in what you might call issue activism, working with different groups on the environment, certainly in opposition to the war, a war that Hillary Clinton voted for when she was in the U.S. Senate, that a lot of Democrats voted for in the invasion of Iraq, and also the way we invaded and continued to occupy Afghanistan. But at the end of the day, what brought me back to wanting to get involved with the Green Party was that I worked with all these groups that did amazing work, whether it's on the environment or for worker rights or for racial justice or for opposing exploitative real estate development in New York City, for example. But at every level of government, you'd have these fantastic activists who have the plan, right? They've written out their white papers. They have a plan for how to move forward in a more just and equitable way. But then you're just waiting for an elected Democrat to be willing to be seen in the same room as you. And so seeing this divorce, seeing this schism between issue politics and electoral work, we've got a lot of great leftists and progressives doing issue work. But if you're not taking power, if you're not getting elected, then you're beholden to the people who are. And the people who are in power, who are elected, the vast majority of elected positions in this country are part of this duopoly system that's been captured by Wall Street. And so I've always looked to the Green Party as an activist party and a party of activists that has sought to unite that split where we're active not just on election day, but every day in the movements, on the streets, and at the ballot box, and in the courtrooms, trying to use all the tools that we have available to fight the power, basically.
Michael, how you doing? This is Ted, located in Long Island, New York. Question I have for you is, what do you say to those who said the Green Party cost Al Gore the presidency in 2000?
Al Gore won the presidency in 2000. I think there's either a problem of history or math in that summary of events. Al Gore won the popular vote in Florida. The election was stolen by the Republican apparatus, including Jeb Bush, in Florida at the time. You got to wonder why Al Gore's campaign did not fight that more vigorously. There's a great labor activist and organizer and writer who I admire. Her name is Jane McAlevey, and I plug her whenever I can. She's got a book called Raising Expectations and Raising Hell. And Jane is not a Green. She, as someone involved in organized labor for over a decade, she helped run many Democratic Party campaigns. But her first-person account of how the Gore campaign and the DNC handled the recount situation in Florida is damning in terms of all the things that are wrong with the Democratic Party and its leadership, mainly, in terms of how they view political struggle. And basically, they brought a knife to a gunfight, and they thought that they could just kind of, seek legal means to address the issue. Meanwhile, the Republicans were actually doing street organizing and movement organizing. Granted, it was right-wing movement organizing in Florida to disrupt the recount process. And the Gore campaign was completely unequipped to deal with that, much as they were completely unequipped to handle much of the campaign. Gore lost his own home state of Tennessee, and he chose an odious war hawk as his running mate in Joe Lieberman. And I think that personally that Gore and the Democratic National Committee conceded to the theft of an election so easily because the Democratic Party knows that it is complicit in election rigging throughout the country every year at the state and local level. And so that was a particularly egregious case of election theft in recent history, but by no means the only one. And I look at I look at the hundreds of thousands of registered Democrats who voted for George W. Bush in Florida. You have this massively broken, corrupt system where a Supreme Court is handing a presidency over along partisan lines. And I think the massiveness of that corruption and the amount of power that we actually need to build as the left or as progressives to challenge that is very scary to people. And so it's easier to point the finger at Ralph Nader and the Green Party rather than to acknowledge that actually the one half of the duopoly that they thought was on their side actually isn't on their side and probably isn't even equipped to face the challenges that we face, even if they are on your side.
Wow, terrific answer. Do you think changing the name to the Progressive Green Party, as it's called in several countries, and of course in Missouri it's simply the Progressive Party, would that help convey the message that the Green Party is about more than the environment? That seems to be kind of a tag that it's hung with.
I worked in public relations and communications and branding for years, and while I have a lot of respect for what for what branding can do or for what a name or a logo can do as a tool in your toolbox, in the end, what really matters is our relationship to our members' relationship to their communities, the work that we're doing, how we represent ourselves and our candidates, and taking uncompromising militant positions on the issues that matter most to working people. I mean, there's something about the name Pepsi that actually tells you what a Pepsi tastes like, or tells you, for that matter, that Pepsi is involved in the expropriation of water sources across the world, right? It's just a name. And so I think that our challenges as the Green Party for what we need to do to accomplish the kind of things that we aspire to run much deeper than our name. And if we're doing what we need to on the ground level in terms of organizing, training new leaders, putting everyday people in positions where they can build leadership and community within their cities and neighborhoods, then I think the name is going to be of tertiary or secondary concern at most.
Well, Michael, this is Lee. You've been fantastic. I do want to say I currently live in Tennessee. I've lived in Seattle. I consider myself a liberal. Ted lives in New York. Todd is in Florida. So I'm the one with the wasted vote, I guess, as the way the process is set up currently. However, I voted for Bernie in the primary, and I do plan to vote for Jill Stein when it comes to the presidential election, which is the same thing I did with state politics last time I voted Green. So, Jill Stein is the presumptive, I should call her Dr. Jill Stein because that's what she is the presumptive nominee of the Greens with 127 of the 202 delegates needed to win. The New York convention is next week. Will you endorse Dr. Stein, and what makes your candidate the best choice for the President of the United States?
Dr. Stein she absolutely is my candidate, and I do endorse her. And that's just, speaking as an individual Green. I am a supporter of Dr. Stein's campaign. And thank you for mentioning our upcoming convention that will be in Troy, New York, and that's available for all registered Greens in New York State to attend and vote at. And if you're a registered Green in New York and you're listening to this and you cannot attend the convention, you can actually cast an absentee ballot. We've extended the postmark deadline for that to Monday, basically. So you can go to gpny.org/ballot, and there's an online request form to have basically a link to a PDF sent to you. You print it, fill it out, get it in the mail by Monday, and your vote will be counted for your presidential candidate of choice. But getting back to your question, the reason I believe Dr. Stein is the best person to be the president of the United States is that she, in her record as a candidate and as an activist, has shown a commitment to real and radical action towards addressing the existential crises that we face today, namely the crises presented by catastrophic climate change. Dr. Stein nationally and we as Greens in New York State have campaigned on the dire need for a Green New Deal as a planet saver and a job creator to create a massive public works program to build all the solar panels, the wind turbines, everything else to create, to get us to 100% clean energy by 2030. That's the benchmark that we need to shoot for to avoid that 2 degrees Celsius increase or more that could set off the runaway cascading effects of global warming. And that is an emergency. That is a dire emergency. And you've got Republicans who won't admit to the existence of climate change, and then you've got Democrats who will admit that climate change exists, and they'll talk about it in their speeches, but they don't actually behave in office in accordance with that belief. They're not using the bully pulpit that is available to them as elected officials. They're not using whatever legislative or executive powers they have to take the real action that we need. And I think the problem with that is because Democrats, by and large, across this country are afraid to tax the rich. They're afraid to advocate taxing the 1% Wall Street and corporations to make them pay their fair share into the system so that we have the resources we need to start this Green New Deal, which will eventually end through the economic activity and the job growth that it will create. But to get it started, just like we had to get things started with the first New Deal, it's going to require rich people in this country and corporations which have been offshoring their profits in these tax havens around the world to start kicking in their fair share. And it's not only just her stance on climate change, but also, and this is, I think, a salient difference between Dr. Stein and Senator Bernie Sanders, is that Dr. Stein is the only candidate out there talking about how we need a drastic reduction in the military budget if we want to fund the kind of programs that both the Green Party and Bernie Sanders have been calling for in terms of the domestic agenda that we have a lot of overlap on. But Bernie has voted for a lot of military appropriations in this time, and he lobbied for the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter to be located in Vermont to get those sweet military jobs. And even the military doesn't like the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. Even people who are into fighter jets don't like the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, never mind pacifists like myself, or at least, anti-war people like myself. And if you want to have the money for a massive jobs program to, not just fight climate change, but also to renew our decaying infrastructure across the country, we've got to cut the military budget by at least half. And you can cut the military budget by half, and we'll still be spending more on war than any other country on the planet. So, yeah, that's why I'm for Dr. Stein, among myriad other reasons. And if there are any in particular you'd like me to discuss, I'd be happy to.
You know what? We got to have you back on. As far as I'm concerned, we definitely need to have you back on to discuss that if you can make it at some point in the future.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate you being on. Where can you be found on social media? And if people want to get involved in the Green Party, how would they do that?
Well, in New York State, I'll speak to you first very briefly. We're at gpny.org. That stands for Green Party of New York. So it's gpny.org. You can reach me at michael@gpny.org. You can reach me on Twitter at Michael E. O'Neill. That's O'Neil. We're probably more active on Facebook than on Twitter at this point, so you can look for the Green Party of New York page on Facebook, along with a discussion group there. The Jill Stein campaign is located at jill2016.com. That's a nationwide campaign with volunteers in every state. And, of course, the Green Party of the United States, which will be having our national convention in Houston in August, which I'm really looking forward to. Looking forward to that 100% humidity, baby. So that's going to be August 4th through 7th. That's at you can gpus.org or gp.org. Both of those URLs work. And, look for us on Facebook and Twitter. I think we're GPNY on Twitter.